Welcome back to the Law and Crime Trial Network. I'm Stacey Delikat, and I have a very special guest joining me now live via Skype. It is our own Aaron Keller, who is live in Rochester, New Hampshire. He has been in the courtroom all day as this Jordan Lamonde trial has played out. So, what first, Aaron, have been your top observations of the day? We have been talking about here, both Adam and I, Bob earlier, about whether or not the prosecutors will really prove that this rose to the level of second-degree aggravated assault. What are your impressions from being in the courtroom?
Well, I think the big surprise of the morning was the defense basically admitting that this was the defendant in the recording and then attacking the language of the statute, which is exactly what you were just discussing. That was a bit of a surprise to me because I thought that what they might be going at in this courtroom and in this trial was more of an attack of the identification, something to say, well, maybe the state can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was indeed the defendant who was in the attack.
Interesting.
Because, that's where I was kind of thinking this might go. So that was a bit of a surprise to a number of us who were watching.
Interesting. I guess I didn't think that because I just came in and I looked at the defense opening statement and I said, yeah, they said, again, it's one of these cases where it's not a whodunit is basically what they said. I guess, yeah, you could say he's not really that identifiable, right? In the video, you see a guy with a hooded sweatshirt. The fact that they're basically admitting, yeah, it was him, that means he'll, be likely convicted of at least some charges in this, right?
Well, look, I think that the defense tactic in this is pretty interesting. Their tactic is to say, hey, look, this is the guy, but the letter of the law does not match this. I mean, this is a second-degree felony, so it's a relatively serious conviction up here in New Hampshire, as it would be in any other state. So, look, if this gets knocked down to a lesser-included charge, the defense is going to be popping corks. That certainly seems to be the defense's tactic. The defendant's family is in court. I know that the victim had been seen in some local press interviews here in New Hampshire and in Boston, because keep in mind, we're only about an hour north of downtown Boston. So I know that they came up to cover this case initially. And look, the local police department only released a sliver of some of the recording of this attack happening. They basically released the part that they believed was necessary in order to identify the defendant, and it was through tip calls that the local police were able to identify the defendant.
Right.
What's interesting about that is that we were trying to sort of jockey for positions in court to actually see the recording that they were playing for jurors of the attack in full. It's unfortunate that it was just really, really hard to see that from the angle that we have, which was a pretty narrow one. Wow. Yeah, I mean, the way that they had the monitor turned towards the jurors.
How long is the whole video? Because we've been seeing the 30-second clip, right?
Yeah, that's what the police department released when the attack happened. And they released it to say, hey, look, we can't figure out who this guy is. We've got to figure out who this guy is. And it was through tip calls that they identified the defendant. This victim was struck under the allegations 39 times, and we only see one punch. So I don't know how long it is, but certainly there's a lot more to it than just what we saw that was released early. Yeah,
for sure. Well, Aaron, thanks so much for your expertise there. We know you will stay on top of it for us, that you know the New Hampshire system. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back here on Law and Crime. Well, the trial out of Rochester, New Hampshire that we have been following all day, that of Jordan Lamonde, has wrapped up for the night. But we had our own eyewitness there in the courtroom today, Law and Crime's own Aaron Keller. He is with me now via Skype from outside the courthouse in Rochester. Aaron, we talked a little bit about your observations from today in court before our last break. But let me ask you, because when this crime happened and when the police put out the videotape asking for tips to find this guy, they said that this was a vicious, unprovoked attack that shocked our community. What are your impressions about the jurors? I know that you have a law license from New Hampshire, right? You said that's where you got your first law license. How is the community, how are the jurors, do you think, responding to both the prosecutors and the defense's arguments so far?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I can speak to because oftentimes we sit around the table there in New York and say, gee, I wonder how the local jury is taking that. And certainly the local attorneys know their local communities. Here I can offer a little bit of insight about that. you have to remember, New Hampshire is the most conservative state in the Northeast. It is the live free or die state. People here are extremely wary of government, and not everyone, but I'd say that's a pretty strong strain here. So a lot of what we heard in the defense's opening statement was the defense speaking to people like that in case they are on the jury, saying, hey, look, this law is designed to make illegal conduct that is much more egregious than what we saw in this attack. And I think that the defense was really speaking to people, assuming that they may be on that jury, as many people here in New Hampshire are, very wary of government power. They are wary of prosecutors wielding strong authority. And look, prosecutors here know that as well, which is why I think prosecutors, if I were to guess, probably didn't budge very far on any pretrial offer which may have been made as far as a plea. That's what we were hearing out of the defense. People here are very observant as jurors. They're very involved in their government. I will say that. They're vigilant. People here are, going to be paying attention to this closely, I think.
Yeah, I mean, interesting points there, right? The defense attorney said, look, he's the person in the video, as we said before. They admitted that, right? Front and center, but he shouldn't be held accountable for the second-degree assault charge because there's no evidence that he had no regard for Aaron's life. And they went through sort of the prosecutor's arguments, and they said, look, no verbal threats, there were no weapons used and so forth. So it's interesting, your point that the people in New Hampshire, weary of government, might really be really receptive to that message. I mean, look, a New Yorker even here watching it, I thought, yeah, that defense attorney did a pretty good job of disputing, the prosecutions.
And keep in mind, where we are located for people watching around the country. You've got to remember the first shots of the American Revolution were fired a few miles down the road across the Massachusetts border. As I said, that strain of vigilance in government is very, very active here. And I think that's what the defense was trying to tap into. Another thing I want to mention, Stacey, because oftentimes we sit there in the studio in New York and we say, this attorney might want to sort of ratchet this kind of argument up or knock this one down a little bit. What I saw in this trial is classic New Hampshire trial advocacy, the same way I was taught it by another New Hampshire attorney, the getting the witnesses off the stand, to get up in front of a monitor, to point around, to reference things. Classic New Hampshire trial strategy. Very, very strong opening statements, strong closing arguments. And I think that this is a pretty solid New Hampshire trial, the way that I remember seeing them when I lived up here full time.
Well, it's certainly an interesting one for us to watch. Really quickly, Aaron, before we let you go, what can we expect to see tomorrow?
I just actually got my hands on the witness list. I'm certainly curious to see where else this is going to go. The prosecution has not wrapped the case up yet, so I expect perhaps to see a few more law enforcement experts, law enforcement type folk on the stand. We may see a couple of people who knew the victim a little bit more. Of course, the victim testified first. That's a guess, but look, I just got the witness list right before I called in with you, so I need to get a look at them. And possibly a defense case, possibly pushing into Friday. The jurors are on the hook through Friday here. This is expected to be a short trial. We don't know if the defense or the state are planning closings on Friday or exactly how long this is going to go. But if I were to guess, I'd say the defense is probably going to present its case starting sometime tomorrow.
All right, Aaron, thank you for that and all of your analysis from in the courtroom. We know you will stay on top of it for us, and we appreciate you being up there.
I'll see you later, Stacey.
All right, we'll see you back here tomorrow. Okay, so there you have it, the Jordan Lamonde case, our own Law and Crimes, our own Aaron Keller up there following every step of the trial.